the quiet hours of the night, when the world retreats and the mind wanders, there exists a part of you that remains hidden, a realm of fears, desires, and memories too raw to confront in daylight. Carl Jung called this the shadow, the unconscious vault, where we bury everything we refuse to acknowledge about ourselves. But what if this darkness, far from being a flaw, holds the key to your life's purpose? Jungian philosophy suggests that within the shadow lies not just our repressed pain, but our unlived potential. To face it is to embark on the most perilous and rewarding journey of all, the path to becoming whole. The shadow is not a monster, though it often feels like one. It is the sum of all the traits, impulses, and memories we disown: jealousy, rage, selfishness, but also creativity, courage, and wild joy, deemed unacceptable by our families, cultures, or inner critics. Jung wrote, "Everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is." We suppress these fragments not out of malice, but survival. A child learns to hide their anger to avoid punishment. An adult buries ambition to evade envy. Yet what we exile does not vanish. It festers, shaping our lives in ways we rarely perceive. Consider the man who prides himself on patience but erupts in road rage, or the artist who dreams of painting but dismisses it as impractical. These contradictions are the shadow's fingerprints, a silent war between who we are and who we pretend to be. Jungian psychology argues that until we reconcile these halves, we live as strangers to ourselves, chasing goals that feel hollow because they are not truly ours. Society thrives on order. From childhood, we are taught to categorize: good and bad, light and dark, acceptable and taboo. Emotions like anger or desire are policed. Creativity is often stifled for productivity. We suppress not out of weakness, but because the cost of authenticity seems too high. To admit envy might shatter relationships. To embrace ambition could invite ridicule. But the subconscious mind never forgets. It stores every disowned impulse, every stifled scream. Over time, this suppression becomes a prison. We project our shadows onto others, hating in them what we deny in ourselves, or spiral into self-sabotage. The perfectionist who collapses under procrastination is not lazy. They are terrified their efforts will expose inadequacy. The shadow, Jung warned, is the person you'd rather not be. Yet in that disowned identity lies a roadmap to your deepest truths. Jung called the process of shadow integration individuation, the lifelong journey of harmonizing the conscious and unconscious to realize one's unique potential. This is not self-improvement, but self-reclamation. Until you make the unconscious conscious, he wrote, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Individuation begins with a simple, devastating question. What am I afraid to see in myself? For a CEO, it might be the vulnerability beneath their authority. For a caregiver, the resentment masked by sacrifice. The shadow is not merely our dark side, it is the neglected self. A woman who dismisses her artistic talent as a hobby might discover in her shadow a stifled passion that could redefine her life. By facing these buried truths, we unlock potential that societal scripts could never envision. Shadow work is not for the faint of heart. It demands courage to sit with discomfort, to question narratives we've clung to for decades. Yet Jungian psychology offers tools to navigate this inner labyrinth. Shadow work journaling begins with prompts that pierce the ego's armor. What traits do I judge harshly in others? When have I felt irrational shame? The goal is not to condemn, but to observe. Over time, patterns emerge, recurrent fears, recurring conflicts that trace back to disowned parts of the self. Jung pioneered this technique, where one engages the subconscious through visualization or writing. Imagine confronting a version of yourself that embodies everything you despise. What do they want you to hear? A man who visualizes his lazy shadow might discover it pleading for rest his rigid schedule denies. Jung viewed dreams as messages from the shadow. Recurring nightmares of being chased, falling, or losing teeth often symbolize repressed fears. Keeping a dream journal and reflecting on symbols can unveil hidden anxieties or desires. Challenge the binary of good and evil. Volunteer for a cause that intimidates you. Create art in a style you've mocked. A lawyer who secretly writes poetry might find her shadow holds the key to a more authentic career. For beginners, shadow work can feel like wandering a maze blindfolded. A Jungian therapist acts as a guide, helping to interpret projections and resistances without judgment. To ignore the shadow is to live half alive. Unexamined fears morph into self-doubt. Repressed desires leak out as envy or bitterness. Consider the academic who dismisses their work as trivial, not realizing their shadow harbors a fear of outshining a critical parent, or the partner who avoids conflict, unaware their silence masks a terror of abandonment. Jungian psychology teaches that our greatest weaknesses often guard our deepest strengths. The perfectionist's rigidity might hide a capacity for meticulous innovation. The people-pleaser's compliance could be a dormant talent for diplomacy. By facing the shadow, we transform liabilities into tools. Self-healing in Jungian terms is not about erasing pain, but integrating it. A woman haunted by childhood neglect might discover her shadow holds not just grief, but a fierce independence that fuels her advocacy work. A man ashamed of his temper could channel that intensity into passionate leadership. This is the paradox of shadow work. By embracing what we fear, we disarm it. The shadow is a moral problem that challenges the whole ego personality, Jung wrote. To confront it is to reclaim agency over your story. Jung believed the shadow does not obscure purpose, it reveals it. Our deepest wounds often point to our calling. A person scarred by loneliness becomes a therapist. A survivor of illness advocates for healing. The shadow's pain, when integrated, becomes a compass. Take Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor who founded logotherapy. His shadow, anguish, loss, became the foundation for a philosophy centered on finding meaning in suffering. Jung argued that true purpose emerges not from avoiding darkness, but from alchemizing it. Shadow work is not a one-time excavation, but a lifelong dialogue. As we evolve, new layers of the subconscious emerge. A midlife crisis, for instance, often signals a neglected shadow demanding attention, a buried creativity or stifled ambition. Society's pressures may never cease, but Jungian philosophy offers a refuge, the understanding that wholeness lies not in perfection, but in the courage to be complex. I would rather be whole than good, Jung declared, challenging the notion that we must choose between light and dark. Carl Jung's shadow work is not a call to dwell in darkness, but to recognize that light cannot exist without it. Our shadows, however daunting, are not enemies. They are disowned teachers, guardians of forgotten truths, and architects of our unlived lives. To engage them is not to succumb to chaos, but to forge a self that transcends society's narrow scripts. The purpose of your life is not found in avoiding the shadow, but in daring to dance with it. Jung reminds us, there is no coming to consciousness without pain. Yet in that pain lies the promise of becoming, not who you were supposed to be, but who you truly are.